severed. Across the entire Illyrian continental grid, 4 billion screaming broadcast frequencies flatlined at the exact same microsecond. Dying pacifists do not coordinate radio blackouts. Frightened prey scatters. Never do they mute their panic with mathematical precision. Before the blackout, Illyrian distress channels were a chaotic symphony. Medical ships begging for corridor clearance. Planetary governors reciting non-aggression pacts. Civilian transports broadcasting exact, defenseless coordinates in the naive hope of mercy. Then the dampening pulse hit. In the lower processing trench of the Vokkar dreadnought, Vorath tapped his manipulators against a coolant pipe. The junior analyst despised the sudden static hiss invading his neural feed. He debated running a diagnostic on his cranial implant. Above him, the tactical holosphere projected the slaughter. Green thermal blooms illuminated the unarmored Illyrian cities. The stench of recycled ozone and scorched copper wiring hung thick in the bridge air. Through his peripheral scanner, a microscopic green anomaly blinked. Designation: EO-32. A hyperspace beacon signature originating far beyond the local gravity well. Vorath isolated the telemetry. Planetary ejections often cast sensor ghosts. He flicked the reading into the deletion queue. Logging a false positive during active conquest meant a severe reprimand. Atmospheric ignition achieved, barked the primary gunnery officer. Vorath watched the casualty metric spin. The digits blurred into a meaningless yellow waterfall. The Vokkar celebrated their flawless victory for 4 days, thinking the galaxy had submitted. The part that still haunts the surviving logs? That comes later. 96 hours of dead frequencies followed. Not a single Illyrian counterattack materialized. 0 diplomatic channels requested terms of surrender. Absolute silence radiated from the planet below. Vorath processed the void. Vokkar biology categorized this quiet as fear paralysis. A prey species, recognizing absolute kinetic inferiority, simply ceases all movement to avoid drawing further predatory attention. The command staff drank fermented marrow wine. They declared the Illyrian pacification their cleanest victory in 2 centuries. Yet the static hiss in Vorath's audio feed persisted. It scraped against his tympanic membranes like crushed glass. He pulled up the rejected EO-32 anomaly data from the deletion cache. The tiny green dot had not vanished. It had multiplied. Behind the raw numerical readings lay the rigid physics of hyperspace acoustic dampening. Objects traveling at extreme velocities compress the quantum vacuum ahead of their mass. This severe compression creates a localized gravity shadow. Standard sensors read this shadow not as an incoming object, but as absolute, pristine emptiness. An impossible void preceding a massive kinetic delivery. Through the dense background radiation, Vorath isolated a deeply buried audio fragment. A scrambled Terran transmission, scooped from a relay on Terra Prime exactly 4 seconds after the Illyrian blackout. Hold. One human voice. One word. A heavy, gravel-textured exhalation over a secured military channel. Vorath categorized the intercept. A desperate ally. A Terran commander instructing the surviving resistance to maintain their posture. He logged the audio under irrelevant civilian panic. He closed the file. The human voice sounded small. Insignificant. Hour 72 arrived with hollow tranquility. The dreadnought's internal lighting shifted to the dim amber of standard victory rotation, casting long, serrated shadows across the polished deck plating. Technicians abandoned their scanning stations to join the lower deck feasts, leaving their consoles chiming with unchecked minor proximity alerts. Vorath remained seated. His thorax sank deeper into the cold metal mesh of his operator chair, rigid with an unnamed anxiety. The green anomaly, EO-32, was no longer a single blinking dot on the periphery of his screen. It had fractured into 14 distinct signatures. They were moving at an impossible velocity, riding the absolute edge of the acoustic dampening shadow. His talons clicked against the glass. The flagship floated dead ahead, its energy projectors retracted. In a lazy orbit, 300 escort vessels drifted, essentially asleep. Vorath tried to route a priority warning to the helm. The system rejected his authorization code. Junior analysts did not interrupt victory banquets. 14 targets. 96 hours. Commander, Vorith whispered. His vocal cords tightened. No one heard him over the celebration. The marrow wine flowed. The plasma batteries cooled. The Vokkar fleet drifted in a loose blockade formation, shields powered down to minimal preservation levels. Vorith absently tapped his lower manipulators against a cooling vent. The static hiss in his audio feed had returned, slightly louder this time. He debated, once again, whether to run a localized diagnostic on his headset wiring. Then, he ran a secondary mass scan on the approaching anomalies. The telemetry returned a reading unmatched by standard naval architecture. These were not Illyrian escape frigates. They carried the dense footprint of pure osmium and cold-forged iron. They moved in perfect, predatory synchronization. He magnified the visual array. The distortion field ripped open. 14 dreadnoughts, painted in radar-absorbent matte black, tore a jagged hole in the local gravity well. No hails. No demands for surrender. From the leading Terran vessel, an open-channel broadcast overrode the Vokkar internal comms grid, thick static crackling harshly through the high-fidelity acoustic dampeners, vibrating the deck plates. Vokkar ascendancy. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. The primary gunnery officer laughed, spitting dark marrow wine onto the polished deck plating. 300 Vokkar escorts drifted against 14 Deathworlder ships. Mathematically, it was a slaughter. He barked frantic orders across the command tier, instructing the fleet to power up their heavy plasma batteries, ready to burn these primitive interlopers into cosmic dust. They never fired a single shot. Out of the massive Terran launch bays poured the swarms. Millions of expendable, AI-controlled munitions flooded the vacuum. They moved like a single, liquid organism, a sprawling tidal wave of matte gray metal blocking out the distant starlight. Vokkar point defense grids engaged instantly. The void filled with blinding automated laser fire, superheating the empty space between the opposing fleets until the hull sensors screamed. The immense thermal damage the melting drones simply absorbed. They did not evade. They did not retreat. Their rapidly liquefying chassis formed a physical wall of molten slag, shielding the massive kinetic projectiles hidden deep within their relentless formation. On his cracked console, Vorith wiped a smudge of grease from the primary dial. He adjusted the contrast knob, squinting against the harsh glare of the screen, mildly annoyed that the maintenance crew hadn't properly calibrated the display before the shift began. How did the Terran algorithms know the exact shield rotation frequencies? Then, the realization crashed through his neural feed like a physical blow. The 96 hours of dead frequencies. The absolute, unnatural silence from the pacifist planet below. It was never fear paralysis. Prey does not freeze to await death. The Illyrians had muted their entire planetary broadcast grid to provide the Terrans an uncorrupted, pristine signal environment. For 4 continuous days, the arrogant Vokkar fleet had drifted in low orbit, unknowingly broadcasting their exact shield harmonics, their reactor power cycles, their lazily cooling plasma vents directly into the dark. That single intercepted word Vorith finally understood. Hold. Not a desperate plea to the dying citizens. A cold, calculated command to the Terran gunnery officers. Wait for the targeting solutions. Let them celebrate their victory. Map every single structural weakness. The Vokkar had not conquered Illyria. They had parked themselves directly inside a crosshair. Deafening alarms ruptured the bridge air. The dreadnought shuddered violently as the first kinetic impacts struck the hull. No energy weapons. No plasma beams to be safely absorbed by the advanced Vokkar thermal dissipators. Just raw, hyper-accelerated mass. An osmium javelin, propelled by a magnetic railgun at a fraction of light speed, tore through the flagship's port side. The kinetic shear bypassed the thermal algorithms completely. Thick titanium bulkheads crumpled like dried leaves. Vacuum claimed the lower engineering decks in a silent, violent exhalation, sucking screaming technicians into the freezing void. 300 escort vessels panicked, breaking their loose blockade formation in a desperate attempt to maneuver, only to collide heavily with the relentless incoming drone swarms. Vorith clung desperately to his shaking console. His minor anxiety over receiving a disciplinary reprimand evaporated instantly. The immediate survival of the vanguard fleet dissolved into a mathematical impossibility. Shattered irreparably was the 2-century myth of absolute ascendancy supremacy, crushed under the brutal weight of cold-forged iron. The tactical holosphere flashed a blinding, continuous red. Massive debris fields expanded outward where pristine warships had drifted lazily only moments ago. Down on the planetary surface, beneath the burning ozone layer and falling ash, the true architect of this slaughter remained kneeling in the dirt. Lyra, 40 years old, a civilian botanist. Her trembling hands, meant for cultivating fragile atmospheric scrubbers, still clutched the shattered casing of a localized seed vault. She was the one who had synchronized the final distress burst, painting the Vokkar flagship with a tight-beam laser designator just microseconds before severing the grid entirely. One fragile pacifist had pulled the trigger on a galactic empire. The one-sided slaughter took precisely 11 minutes. Secondary reactor explosions rippled across the rapidly collapsing Vokkar perimeter. The Deathworlder warships did not slow their advance. They accelerated straight through the expanding wreckage, their massive, heavily armored hulls crushing whatever escape pods failed to alter their trajectory in time. Voritha's operator chair sparked violently, sending a sharp electrical jolt through his thorax. Emergency lighting bathed the ruined bridge in an arterial, rhythmic red glow. The primary gunnery officer lay pinned beneath a collapsed structural support beam, his spilled marrow wine slowly pooling with his own leaking fluid. Heavy Terran drop ships detached from the dreadnoughts above. They were blocky, ungraceful atmospheric entry vehicles, burning white-hot through the Illyrian stratosphere. Armored soldiers would soon secure the ruined perimeters. Medical aid would be distributed to the terrified survivors. A terrifying new alliance, forged in osmium impacts and radioactive ash, was now permanently sealed. Vorith remained completely frozen at his station, his secondary manipulators trembling uncontrollably over the cracked glass of his scanner. The tactical holosphere flickered twice. Only dead static remained on the main visual feed. On the extreme edge of the peripheral scanner, EO32 blinked. The tiny green dot had shifted to an amber hue. It now projected the standard hazard icon for a drifting debris field.